José Morales se unió a Big Society Capital en octubre de 2012. Antes de unirse a Big Society Capital, trabajó para el equipo de Private Equity en Developing World Markets, un vehículo de inversión de microfinanzas con sede en Estados Unidos. Esta organización proporciona capital a entidades financieras que operan socialmente en los mercados emergentes. Pepe tiene un MBA con especialización en la empresa social de la Universidad de Columbia y un Bachelor's en Ingeniería Industrial en la Universidad Iberoamericana. Bienvenido, gracias, Pepe.
Gracias, Rodrigo. Hola, buenas. Y gracias no nada más a Rodrigo, a Fabricio, a toda la gente de New Ventures y a todos los sponsors por tenernos acá. Bueno, de hecho, voy a empezar con un video, pero el título de mi presentación es, y les pido una disculpa porque la voy a hacer en inglés, se llama Unlocking Value, The Role of Governments in Impact Investing. Y les voy a presentar un poco un case study de lo que ha pasado en Inglaterra en los últimos años, cómo se ha desarrollado esta industria ahí y, en particular, el rol que ha jugado el gobierno. As an introduction, I will let the chairman of Big Society Capital give you a brief history of how the impact investment sector has developed in the UK over the past few years. El video, por favor. I hope this doesn't count towards my timing as well. I guess I can tell you before the video starts, I can just tell you very quickly, Sir Ronald Cohen, well, I'll tell you after the video.
Probably now.
Maybe I'll tell you now. He was, some people call him the grandfather of venture capital in the UK. He founded the first venture capital fund 30 years ago or something like that called Apex. And he essentially championed this concept. And approximately 15 years ago, he started doing applying the same concept to social investing in the UK. He founded the first impact investing fund in the UK called Bridges Ventures in 2002. And he has, through his personal efforts and through his involvement in a number of task forces, he founded Social Finance, the company that structured the first social impact bond, and more recently, Big Society Capital, which is what in the UK they call the first social investment bank. Anyways, he can tell you a little bit more about it.
I'm delighted to be joining you in Mexico in this way, since it was unfortunately impossible for me to join you in person. And I've been asked to say a few words about the British experience of impact investment. We'd like to take you back to 2000, when the Social Investment Task Force was set up, and I began to work as its chair with its members to try to understand how we could improve the way in which we tackle social issues. And in 2005, when the government began to negotiate with the big banks here to take away from them bank accounts which had been separated from their owners for 15 years or more, I was asked to chair the Commission on Unclaimed Assets and to pick up one of the recommendations we made in 2000, which was that to answer this question about the funding of non-profits, we really needed financial innovation, and we needed, in order to achieve that, to create a social investment bank that would bring together people who understood both social issues and finance. In 2007, we created Social Finance, and by 2010, Social Finance had developed and implemented the first social impact bond. And I'd like to dwell on the social impact bond for a moment, because for the first time we had a breakthrough in thinking. And the breakthrough in thinking was to say, if you link the achievement of a social performance to a financial return, funded from savings that the government would make, then you gave social entrepreneurs and social organizations potentially the key to the financial markets. But that in itself wasn't going to answer the question that I was asking myself about the fragmentation of the social sector. When the coalition came to power in 2010, it began to be interested in the idea of giving all of its unclaimed assets to create the social investment bank that we had recommended. And at the beginning of 2012, Big Society Capital came into being with £600 million of capital. And fast forwarding since then, we can see that there is a huge demand for capital in the social sector. We have seen a number of social impact bond issues raised, and we have participated in those. But just as importantly, we've seen almost a dozen organizations become interested in launching social investment funds of one kind or another. For those of you who come from the financial business, I would put it this way. We're in the process of creating a new asset class. Potentially, we're on the brink of a revolution of social entrepreneurship. My hope is that this new generation of social entrepreneurs will bring about a social revolution that begins to give everyone in our society a chance. Thank you very much.
Thank you, guys. If I can get the presentation back on. Perfect. Right. So I will tell you a little bit more about the social impact bond and of Big Society Capital, just so that I can give you the fundamentals of how it works and how it came to be, and again, particularly how the government played a role in that. And afterwards, I would like to make just point out some examples of where the government in Latin America, specifically in Mexico, could play a role, and the potential of them participating in this market, and how what could be simple for the government can unlock a lot of value for such a nascent market. So to start, and I would recommend, if you're interested in social impact bonds, this is not my expertise, and particularly this is how it happened in the UK, which I don't think is transferable directly to Latin America or Mexico, but there is a great panel, which Instiglio, I think it's leading, and they will be able to give you a better idea of how they could be applied in Latin America. But I guess the base, or the point where we start, is in the UK, the government usually just funds the operating costs to provide a service, a social service in particular, health, education, drug rehabilitation, rehabilitation of reoffending, and they essentially take all the risk of paying for those interventions. They are utilizing only the capital that's available to them at that moment in time, or that's budgeted. And while some did implement what they call payment by results, and you can link them to performance, the reality is they need the upfront working capital, and the government will always kind of have to fork that out upfront. The innovation was bringing in private investors, and this intermediary, this intermediary that plays a very important role in addressing those 3 points that I made earlier. And in very simple terms, what happens is the private investors put the upfront working capital, the social impact bond manages that, and is the intermediary between these three parties. They provide the funding for the operating costs based on a performance that needs to be achieved. And If that is achieved, the government, only then does the government pay out the money that is needed to fund those costs. And the innovation here is that these service providers are usually either a new institution or a new intervention that probably the government doesn't want to risk pioneering or putting money if it hasn't been proven. So here, the private investors take that role. The service providers are given a chance. The social impact bond, as an intermediary in this sector, gets a fee from that. The government gets better performance or delivers better results, makes some savings in the way, and ultimately pays back investors with an additional return on the savings that the government realized. Now, if we look again at those 3 points that I was making, the risk is now in this area. If the service provider does not deliver the results, then the private investors don't get paid. So the government gets less risk. It's bringing in more capital because it only needs to pay ideally less money than it had budgeted if it works. But in the meantime, there's more capital flowing into the sector, and it's performance-based. As Ronald Cohen was saying, it allows you to put, in some sense, a monetary value on the social impact that you're creating. The key thing here from the government's perspective is they are the ones that need to commission this. They need to ultimately make those savings available in the future, make a commitment to make that happen. And from my point of view, what is very different is for them betting on a social enterprise delivering a better result than it has been done before. And getting this over this threshold of somebody else can do a better job. It doesn't need to be a private institution. It doesn't need to be a nonprofit. It could be anyone. But the concept is, as Charlie and Lisa said, it needs to be evidence. That's why it's linked to performance. And again, this is what allowed, there's now 16 social impact bonds operating in the UK. And mainly through the buy-in from the government. The next example that I wanted to make is Big Society Capital, which, as Ronald Cohen was saying, the government allowed dormant accounts, which is money that's been left in a bank account for over 15 years. It usually kind of sits under the mattress of a bank, to put it that way. They ring-fence that capital to be utilized to grow the ecosystem that we've been talking about and to act as this social investment bank. One of its key corollaries is it needs to be a wholesale investor. We got £600 million. That is potentially disruptive if you just flood the market and you become the market and not create a market. So we need to be a wholesale investor that only invests in these intermediaries, and it can be a fund, it could be an advisor, it could be a social stock exchange, but again, it needs to contribute to building the ecosystem for social investments. The next point is we need to be a market champion. It's not just through our investments that we can have an impact. It's advocating for policy. It's bringing some consensus or creating the networks that are needed for this market to thrive. And this is a very interesting point because all of our investments, as you can see, there's quite a few layers here. And we want to make a return on our investment because we want to demonstrate and prove the concept that we can be self-sufficient and that these, again, prove the concept that, again, Charlie and Lisa have proven themselves, but on a systemic scale, and that other stakeholders can participate. Banks, mainstream financial investors, high net worth individuals, you name it. And finally, which is, again, very important, is the government had to change policy for the dormant accounts to be utilized for this purpose. And the government has steered a lot of things for this to happen. But ultimately, Big Society Capital is an independent company that acts as a fund manager for these type of money. And we are not mandated by the government. We were designed by a committee that had government members in it. But again, the government needs to acknowledge its role and unlock value and make things happen, but step back and allow other forces of the market to achieve its goals. This is just to give you a quick example. Big Society Capital was founded just under 2 years ago. And these are all the funds that we have invested in. These are mainly social impact bonds. And we don't only invest in funds, we invest in what we call infrastructure, which again is the social stock exchange or financial advisors, and all of these players in the ecosystem as you would have in any other industry, just specifically focus on impact investing. What else is the UK government doing aside from championing social impact bonds and creating big society capital? The Cabinet Office itself has a social investment group. They have created a knowledge center for social impact bonds. They have made grant capital available for investment readiness and for social incubators. Again, as has been talked about how important these are before. They're now at a stage where all of these efforts are very institutional, but have not allowed individual investors to participate. So there is a tax reform going on where there will be specific tax relief provided to high net worth individuals that want to participate in the market. And ultimately, the G8 took place in London last year, and the Prime Minister held a social impact investing conference. And they've become, or they've, in the UK, they've kind of sold London as the champion in impact investment. And a lot of countries, particularly from the G8, have come to learn lessons from what they're doing. And they're now, to them, it really didn't cost them anything. They got money from dormant accounts. They're paying out of savings for the social impact bonds. And they have now established themselves as the pioneers and the leaders of social impact investing in the developed world. And I should mention, all of this is only in the UK, mainly because it's funded from UK taxpayers' money or UK savings account. As a brief recap, I mean, it all started in 2000 with the Social Investment Task Force. And it was, again, the government, the way it happened is they asked industry experts to think about ways to solve social problems with an innovative approach. Not just philanthropic, not just private, but this intersection. And it took a while, almost 7 years, for the first tangible thing to happen. But after that, it's really taken a very quick process to evolve into now having an actual social investment bank that has made commitments of over £150 million, and still with an operating market that doesn't have like an invisible hand from the government steering it or prescribing it in a particular way. The lessons that I wanted to talk with you are not so much how a big society capital or, again, a social impact bond should be implemented in Mexico or in Latin America. It's more about how should we start thinking of what we can ask the government for. How do we engage them so that they engage with us in a way? Some of the steps are, to start a social investment task force. We don't need the government to invite us to do it, but with this specific goal of building a relationship or continuing the relationship with them. And it's kind of like planting the seed. And the examples are, it could be just a market champion, leading a network, advocating for policy. It could be providing some grant capital specifically for investment readiness and incubation. It could make direct investments into either intermediaries or institutions. I mean, the reality is it could take a number of different roles depending on the market that you're operating and what is needed. In Colombia, we saw the market has consolidated quite a bit. There is now a social investment bank. What if the government could support them in some way? What if it could give them capital directly or just interact with them because it's a more systemic intermediary? And ultimately, it can brand itself as a pioneer and as an innovator. And particularly for government, because of the way it works, this is a nice thing for them to have. This is something that they can utilize. This is something that they can use as a branding. And it needs to be acknowledged that it's a little bit of a win-win. The last thing I wanted to say is, because a lot of people ask me this when I tell them about big society capital, is what happens with Mexican dormant bank accounts? What are they used for? So where they are is, in Mexico, the law considers dormant bank accounts dormant after 5 years. So if you go on a long trip, remember to at least check your balance once after 5 years. Every year, instead of accumulating it, they transfer it to this agency, or this body called the Patrimonio para la Beneficencia Pública. And in 2012, there was approximately $1 million that passed from dormant accounts into the Patrimonio para la Beneficencia Pública. What it does, most of the funds from this patrimonio are utilized to support the health sector. And indeed, it's useful research, it's at-risk capital, but if we look at the budget for the health sector in 2012, it's $1 billion. So what does $1 million do in context to $1 billion? Less than 0.1%. It's a drop in the water. And I guess the invitation for me is, how would you use an additional $1 million every year to build the Mexican impact investment sector? And what are the pieces of the ecosystem that we need? We are the ones best placed. This is a long run, as we could see here. It took almost 14 years to get to where we are, but things are moving quicker. The ecosystem is already there. It's just about supporting it a little bit better. And with that, I will leave you this quote from Sir Ronald Cohen again. Contrary to the fears of some, impact investment is not about government relinquishing responsibility for social issues, nor is it about privatization, very important. It's about government encouraging innovation, paying for successful interventions, and driving down the cost of achieving a successful outcome. And thank you very much.
Gracias. Pepe, muchas gracias por la presentación. Quiero invitar ahora a Jennifer Price. Jennifer Price lleva más de 20 años trabajando en finanzas y desarrollo comunitario. Actualmente funge como presidente y CEO de la Fundación Calvert. Anteriormente, su papel de directora dirigió el equipo de iniciativas estrategias de la organización y su labor en la obtención de capital en desarrollo de nuevos productos e iniciativas y el marketing y comunicación. Jenny, muchas gracias por estar aquí. Es un honor tenerte.
Gracias. And the clicker.
The clicker is...
Thank you. Good morning, everyone. I have two microphones. Hold on. There we go. So I've been asked today to share with you all the journey that we're on at Calvert Foundation. And in particular, Calvert Foundation is based in the US, although we work globally. And the journey we're on at Calvert Foundation is very tied to what you've heard throughout the morning within that ecosystem of impact investing, to the place of raising capital. So we're very connected to the capital markets. We're very connected to the providers of capital into the space of impact investing, in the US in particular. We raise our money from individuals and institutions in the US, and then we bring that money around the globe to organizations. So I'm going to share with you again the journey we're on here at Calvert Foundation, talk a little bit about our history, share a little bit about the ecosystem of impact investing and how it's evolving rapidly, and then also share with you how we're seeing our future unfold in that rapidly evolving ecosystem, and some tactics that we're finding are very effective to accelerate the investor involvement and engagement in this space. So what we're really trying to do is how can we get investors into this space? How can we get them into this space, though, with the right type of capital, the kind of capital that our communities need? So this is our staff. As I mentioned, we're all in Bethesda, Maryland. And the journey, as I mentioned, we're on is about capital raising. And just to clarify before I go in, even though we're called a foundation, we are not endowed. We are not endowed. So we do not make grants. We do not have a corpus that sits on our balance sheet to provide us support or stability. What we do is we raise capital from investors, and we lend that money to groups around the globe. So our note was made, our Calvert Community Investment Note was designed and made to bring capital in from the traditional investor, a retail investor. So anyone who had any type of investment assets to come into this space. Today we have about 5,000 investors. They range from $20 to $10 million. So lots of diversity within our investor base. And where our money goes is around the globe. About 40% goes into international markets and 60% stays here in the United States. 60%. And so what we really did do, though, when we defined our community investment note, is we created a product that was accessible and easy for the capital markets to access, so that an individual or a financial advisor could easily pull that note and put it into someone's investment portfolio, similar to how Charlie and Lisa shared this morning. We wanted to be that type of product that looked like everything else in the capital markets. And when you buy our note, oftentimes people put it into their fixed income class of investments. So right now we sell the note in durations of 1 to 10 years from 0 to 3%. And again, we have about 5,000 investors, and so we have a deep history in democratizing impact investing, trying to bring the masses into this movement and therefore to expand the movement. This is a simplified version of the ecosystem that you've seen a few times this morning. What it is the supply of capital, the money in. This is where Calvert Foundation plays its dominant role. Over here on the right is where the money leaves. That is where it travels to organizations around the globe, whether it's a social enterprise or a community health care clinic in the US, perhaps a microfinance institution abroad. In the middle is a lot of intermediation or connectors, funds, products, pathways for people to take money and get it into the ground in the way that it needs to be there. And then on the bottom is all the infrastructure, what we heard about, rating systems, IRIS, GIN, accelerators, groups that are helping evolve the social enterprise space. This ecosystem has evolved tremendously over the last 5 years, very much from what you heard even in the UK in the last speech. It took 14 years for big society to move into the moment it is, but now things are on a flywheel. They're happening very fast. We're seeing that too in the United States, where this ecosystem took quite some time to evolve, but now we're on a rocket ship, and we are going very fast into the next stage of impact investing. However, I would say that this ecosystem is evolving in different paces, in different places of the world, and in different sectors of the economy. So perhaps education is not quite as evolved as the environment, et cetera, et cetera. Or different capital products aren't as evolved as others. So equity raiser on the money in, and there's equity users on the money out. There's also debt raisers on the money in, and debt consumers on the money out. Different products have evolved at different paces. In the US, the community development space is very highly evolved. There we have a lot of strong intermediaries. We call them community development finance institutions. And they deploy capital to groups around the United States that are very engaged in healthcare, affordable housing, or education. We also have built up a lot of infrastructure in the community development space. We have a ratings agencies called CARS now that validates as a third-party assessment of the intermediaries and validates not only the work they are doing, but the impact that they are having. So all that infrastructure has led to a more efficient flow of capital through this ecosystem and greater scale. Where we see that really having happened in our impact investing space is in microfinance. That is a very well-developed marketplace where this ecosystem has all the right components quite well matured, and therefore you have a lot of scale, a lot of volume moving through. But for Calvert Foundation, because a lot of this is evolving, we have had the opportunity to reflect where we are in this journey of impact investing. We have a 20-year history, and over most of our history, we spent time on all parts of this ecosystem, ensuring that it would evolve to hold us and this whole system into the future. But with so much of it now having evolved, as we just heard over the course of the morning, both the intermediation, the infrastructure, we've had this great moment in time where we can focus on the money inside. And that is part of our future. That's the journey we're on, is how now can we accelerate the entry of more investment dollars into the field. We often hear about how we can accelerate the growth of the deployment capacity in our field, building the social enterprises, building the infrastructure needed to actually deploy the capital. But rarely do we hear about tactics or key successes in getting more impact dollars into the field. And that's exactly where we're starting to spend all our time and energy. Because we believe if you can mobilize capital, but also the right type of capital, which is very important, then we can really open up this whole system and get much more capital onto the ground. So as we've been on this journey, and it is one that we are in the midst of, so what I'm saying today may change the next time I come to see you. But I did want to share 4 things that we are learning, 4 tactics that we are finding are very powerful in awakening the investor and getting them into this field, or accelerating the window between when you have that first conversation with someone over here about impact investing, who's a possible investor in the field, and when they actually do invest that first dollar. And we have found 4 things so far in this journey that have been very powerful. And the first one is leading with the heart. So for the first 18 years of our history, we sold the value proposition to our investor that was very head-driven. It was one of a financial and a social return, and explaining how this financial investment could provide both. We would quantify the financial return, we would show data around the social return, and have a very good conversation about that. In 2012, we changed tactics. We launched our first program that was very focused on a sector, women. It was our Win-Win program, or Women Empowering Women. We dedicated $20 million in that program to organizations around the globe to empower women. And what we did then is we went back to the investor market and simplified the conversation and took it into the heart. We started the conversation with our investors, financial advisors, and individuals and institutions, all of them, with, if you care about women, there's a great opportunity for you to take action beyond your philanthropy and beyond the time that you contribute. And that was a whole different conversation. Whole different conversation when you took it into the heart. And so with that, we found that we awakened a whole new investor base. We were able to successfully close this program as of December of last year. And in the process, we gained nearly 1,000 new investors in Calvert Foundation and new impact investors in general. So we were able to reach outside of the traditional impact investor into a whole different and new impact investor by starting the conversation with what they cared about rather than the intellectual, financial, and social return. We're taking that experiment, which it was, and now we're incorporating it deeply in all the work we do. So in 2012, we'll be launching 2 new initiatives, one around U.S. cities, so in Detroit, in Minneapolis, in Denver, creating local notes for people that care about that city and investing that money that we raise in that city. We're also starting programs that are global for U.S. diaspora to invest in their country of heritage. And so for them to reach Mexico, Latin America, countries in Africa, U.S. investors being able to find that connection back to their country of heritage. Again, a conversation from the heart. And then we're also looking at exploring a note around global health. So in 5 years, I expect that you'll look at Calvert Foundation, you'll see 5 pathways that an investor can enter Calvert Foundation. One around women, that will continue on. One around place, both global and in the US. One around global health, and then I expect one around the environment. And with that identity pathway built up, the investor will be able to come in a place that they're familiar with what they care about, and then explore the whole field of impact investing. Calvert Foundation has historically, as a footnote, been a starting point for many people coming into the impact investing sector. We have a very safe product. It's a debt product. It has a 20-year track record. We create our own liquidity. So if an investor wants to get their cash back, we'll honor early redemptions. And we have a very diversified portfolio, both around the globe, as I mentioned, plus throughout different sectors, so that we are not overly exposed to any one shock in the global system. With all that combined, what we've done is really narrowed the perceived and the real risk in this space and made it much more accessible for a first-time investor to come into the space. And what we do, and we continue to encourage, is getting people in, and then it opens the door to so much more. So the second tactic that we have learned is we learned through our win-win investment again is when we create a pretty snazzy brand, as you see, win-win. We couldn't believe when we went out to the market that it hadn't been trademarked, but it hadn't. And it stands for Women Investing in Women Initiative. But more importantly, what we did is we leveraged thought leadership that was already in the field. So we have this unique brand that sits aside from Calvert Foundation that allows people to latch on through that lens of women. But we leveraged thought leadership in the field. There was a group called Criterion Ventures that had developed a lens, a gender lens, and it was a really unifying, inclusive way to look at groups that were empowering women. They looked at three things. If that group was creating products that enhanced the lives of women, it could be cook stoves, it could be menstrual products. They were looking if that group was empowering women's livelihoods in general. And third, if they had women in leadership positions on the board or management. They took that and they united that analysis into a simple narrative called the Gender Lens Investment. And they brought that narrative to the marketplace. And what that did is it bundled a whole group of investments, whether they were equity, whether they were debt, regardless of where they were traveling in the globe. All these investments had a simple narrative that unified them. And for us in particular, when we went to market with our product, we called it the Calvert Foundation Win-Win product, but it was a gender lens product. And we started to mark that gender lens narrative in the field. And today there's many more products that have evolved in equity and mutual funds and debt all around the gender lens theme. And so this narrative, moving up a level from bringing the investor outputs, such as women's jobs maintained or women's businesses developed, those are important and they're in our data, but bringing the narrative to the investor that's unified across all these impact products that empower women had a very strong effect. And what it did is it gave the investor choice. And so with choice, there's a validating factor. If you go to the market and there's only one shampoo on the counter, you might wonder, do I really need to use shampoo in my hair? Could I just use my bar of soap? When you see 10 shampoos on the counter, you realize, oh, I should use shampoo. They're telling me to use shampoo. And you do the research. You figure out if your hair is oily or if it's dry or if it's fluffy or it's flaky, whatever it might be, and you find the right product to suit you. Similarly, there was a lack of products in the impact investing space. And now as we get more products, as we saw with this women's empowerment and using that gender lens narrative, suddenly there was choice. And choice engaged the financial advisors to do the research, to bring to their client options that they knew would resonate with their client. And so competition is good in this space. And the more products we get, the more choice there is, the more opportunity there is to pull in more investors. The third factor we found, leveraging social media. Oh, one graph is gone. There it is, leveraging social media. In the early days of Calvert Foundation, we used to use direct mail. So pen and paper, create some type of mailer, send it out to teachers and nurses. Those are the people we thought would be most inclined to buy our note. That became very expensive, and like most direct mail, had a very, very low return on investment. So in the early 2000s, we crafted a strategy around addressing financial advisors with the theory if you got one financial advisor to understand the product, you would get their whole client base of 100 people or so. And we create a whole infrastructure to support that strategy. We were able to get on a distributor in the United States and get on multiple broker-dealer platforms. We're on about 200 now. We were able to clear electronically, get a QSIP, do all the things that made us look and feel like every other financial product. This is a channel that's still very, very important and is still very deep in our strategy. But in addition, with the advent of social media, we have the opportunity to go back to selling the note directly to the retail investor, consumer to consumer. So as an afterthought, again, with the launch of our Win-Win initiative and on a shoestring budget, we launched our first social media campaign. And a couple really interesting things happened. It yielded outsized results, first of all. You can see the number of impressions and reach we had was up in the millions. So we were able to start a conversation with people that we weren't able to reach before. Second, we were able to drop the average age of our investor. Through our traditional channels, it's in the early 50s. Online, 30s. Getting the youth engaged in this movement is huge, and it's crucial. Over the next 40 years, the millennials are in a wealth transfer to inherit about $40 trillion. Really capturing those dollars early in their investment considerations and them speaking to their other family members about the power of impact investing has a really positive opportunity for us. And so we have found that social media is a really authentic way to reach that group, but also really economic. And the fourth tactic we found, that awakening capital, which we have found is successful through those tactics I just shared, which we are evolving and learning more, as I mentioned, every day. But it's only viable is if we raise the right capital by doing that. So very, very important to what we are learning about raising capital and being connected to the markets, the capital markets, is ensuring that we're very connected to the ground too. So we spend a lot of time going into communities and speaking with our deployment partners, and we're very lucky. This ecosystem has grown up very much, that there's some very best-in-class groups that are working to deploy the capital in communities. And we have conversations with them that aren't, we have a loan, it's a 3 to 5 year loan, would you like it? It is, what kind of capital do you need to do your work? What kind of capital can make your work catalytic? And it's that conversation that we take back to the investor. And it's that conversation that can be very varied. In some communities we work in, co-ops and sustainable agriculture, it's very short-term loans, 12 to 24 months. And that's the type of capital they need. And that's the type of capital we go back and we share with our investor and we look and seek to raise. In some cities in the US where there is very, very tough economic times, it's much longer-term capital that's needed to revitalize small businesses, to create affordable housing that's sustainable. They need capital that's 15 years in term. And we go back and we share that story with our investor and create the opportunity for the investor to put their money where it can be most catalytic and have that deep impact that they're looking for. So listening. Listening is the last thing that we have found is so important in the work we're doing. It's listening to the needs of the community. And for all of us, it's listening to what the community that's so dynamically evolving now needs and how we can tailor the work we're doing to serve that need. So thank you for listening to me. I am now over, and I will look forward to sharing more time with you throughout the conference. Thank you.